The bruise on her cheek bloomed like a dark flower against her brown skin, and when she finally looked up at him, the man whose hands had orchestrated 1,000 deaths, she saw something more terrifying than his rage. She saw his devotion. In that candlelit room where predators made deals and empires crumbled, Jiang Dong leaned close and asked the question that would paint Seoul streets red. Welcome to the channel. I'm so glad you've joined us for another powerful story. Whether this is your first time here or you're a long-time listener, I'm thrilled to have you in our community. Before we get started, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. It's the best way to support the stories you love. Also, I love seeing how far our stories travel. Leave a comment below and let me know which part of the world you're watching from today. Now, let's jump straight into the story. The thing about monsters Rebecca had learned was that they didn't always look like monsters. Sometimes they wore $1,000 suits that fit like a second skin. Sometimes they smelled like sandalwood and imported cologne. Sometimes they had hands that could sign death warrants with the same pen they used to write generous donations to her literacy program. Jiang Dong was all of these things. She hadn't meant to befriend a crime lord. That wasn't on her vision board when she'd packed her life into 2 suitcases and moved to Seoul 3 years ago. Her mother had called her crazy. Rebecca Marie Johnson, you're going to do what? But Rebecca had been tired of playing it safe. Tired of the same streets in Atlanta, the same disappointed looks from men who wanted her to be smaller, quieter, less passionate about teaching children to read. Korea had seemed like an adventure. A reset button on a life that felt like it was buffering. The literacy center had been her dream made concrete. A small storefront in Itaewon where immigrant kids and struggling students could come after school. She taught English, Korean kids taught her Hangul, and somehow, in the mess of mismatched furniture and donated books, she'd found something that felt like purpose. Jiang Dong had walked into her center on a Tuesday. She remembered because Tuesdays were always slow, and she'd been reorganizing the children's section when the door opened and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He'd stood in the doorway like a question mark made of shadows and expensive fabric. His presence too large for the small space. This is a literacy center, she'd said, because someone had to say something, and the 3 teenagers at the back table had gone completely silent. I can read, he'd replied, his English accented but perfect. Then you're in the wrong place. He'd smiled at that. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a shark might give if sharks had a sense of irony. I'm looking for someone to teach my nephew. He's struggling with English. That had been the beginning. The nephew, a sweet kid named Minjun who was being bullied for his mixed heritage, had become one of her best students. And Dong had become complicated. He'd shown up to the first few sessions, sitting in the back like a dark cloud watching. Then he'd started staying after, asking questions about her program, her funding, her safety in the neighborhood. This area isn't always friendly to foreigners, he'd said once, his eyes scanning the street outside like he was reading a language only he could understand. I can handle myself, she'd replied. I'm sure you can. But humor me. The next week, the 3 men who'd been loitering outside her center, the ones who'd made comments about her skin, her body, her audacity to exist in their space, had disappeared. Just gone. When she'd asked the building owner about it, he'd shrugged and said something about them moving to Busan. She wasn't naive. She knew what Dong was. The tattoos that crept up his neck like ancient stories. The way men moved out of his path on the street. The fact that her center's rent had mysteriously become already paid for the next 2 years. But he'd never been anything but respectful to her. Quiet conversations over coffee that somehow stretched into hours. Him asking about her childhood in Atlanta, her father who died when she was 12, her mother who prayed every night for her daughter's safe return home. Her asking about his work, carefully, never too directly, and him answering in metaphors and half-truths that she'd learned to translate. I solve problems, he'd said once. What kind of problems? The kind that keep people up at night. And who keeps you up at night? He'd looked at her then, really looked at her, and she'd felt something shift in the air between them. Currently, a woman who insists on walking home alone at midnight through neighborhoods where she shouldn't be walking. I like the night, she'd said. It's peaceful. It's dangerous. Maybe I like dangerous. He'd laughed at that. A real laugh, rusty and surprised. No, you don't. You like safe. You like structure. You like knowing that when you help someone they actually get better. That's why you do what you do. He'd been right, of course. But she'd never admitted it. Their friendship, if that's what it was, had grown in the spaces between words. Him showing up at the center with boxes of books and languages she'd mentioned needing. Her texting him photos of Minjun's improved test scores. Him sending a car when it rained. Her refusing the car and walking anyway, just to prove a point. You're stubborn, he'd said. You're controlling, she'd countered. I prefer protective. I prefer independent. They'd danced around each other like that for months. Two people from different worlds, circling something neither would name. She knew it was inappropriate. Knew her friends back home would have interventions and concerns. Knew that everything about Jiang Dong screamed danger. But she also knew that when she talked about her students, his eyes softened. Knew that he listened to her stories about teaching with the same intensity he probably brought to business negotiations. Knew that he'd memorized her coffee order, her favorite authors, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. And she'd memorized things about him too. The way his jaw tightened when he was angry. The small scar above his left eyebrow. The fact that he took his whiskey neat and his coffee black. That he had a sister he rarely mentioned but clearly loved. That beneath the monster everyone else saw, there was a man who'd somehow decided she was worth protecting. It had been innocent. Mostly. Until tonight. Tonight, when everything had shattered like dropped glass. She'd been walking home from a community meeting in Hongdae. A celebration for one of her students who'd gotten into university. She'd stayed late, helping clean up, riding the high of seeing a kid she'd tutored for 2 years holding an acceptance letter like it was made of gold. The street had been quieter than usual. One of those pockets of silence that Seoul sometimes had, where the neon seemed dimmer and the usual hum of the city faded to white noise. She hadn't seen him coming. One moment she was checking her phone, texting her mother a photo of her student's proud face. The next, someone had grabbed her arm, hard, and yanked her into an alley. It had happened so fast. Too fast for her brain to process. One man, then two. Voices speaking rapid Korean that she couldn't follow. Hands that grabbed and pushed. She'd fought. She'd taken a self-defense class freshman year of college. But it hadn't mattered. One of them had slapped her. Hard enough that her vision had sparked white. Hard enough that she'd tasted blood. American bitch, one had said in English. You think you belong here? You think you're safe because you fuck a gangster? She'd tried to scream, but a hand had covered her mouth. Tried to run, but they'd pushed her against the wall. And for a terrifying moment, she'd thought this was it. This was how her story ended. In an alley in Seoul, far from home, far from anyone who could help. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. They'd let her go. Just stepped back. One of them had laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. Tell Jiang Dong that Park Ji-hoon sends his regards. Tell him that everything he protects, we can touch. Then they were gone. She'd stood there, shaking, her cheek throbbing, her blouse torn at the collar. She'd pulled out her phone with trembling hands. Had almost called the police. Almost called her friend Sarah. Instead, she'd called Dong. He'd answered on the first ring. Rebecca. Just her name like he'd been waiting. I need. Her voice had cracked. Can you come get me? 20 minutes later, a car had pulled up. Not one of his usual drivers, Dong himself behind the wheel, his face carved from stone. He'd gotten out, looked at her once, and something in his expression had made her feel like the temperature had dropped 30 degrees. He hadn't asked questions. Just opened the passenger door, waited for her to get in, and drove. Not to her apartment. To his private lounge in Gangnam. The one she'd heard about but never seen. The one where, according to rumor, he conducted the kind of business that newspapers called alleged organized crime activity. Now she sat across from him, in a room that smelled like money and danger, with candles casting shadows that made his tattoos look alive. He hadn't spoken since they'd arrived. Just poured her water, brought her a clean cloth for her face, and waited. Jiang Dong was terrifyingly patient. "I'm okay," she finally said, because the silence was crushing her. "You're not." "I am. Really. It was just wrong place, wrong time." "Rebecca." He said her name like a period at the end of a sentence. Final. Don't what? Don't lie to me. Don't protect whoever did this. Don't make excuses." She looked down at her hands, at the dirt under her nails from where she'd tried to claw at brick walls, at the torn fabric of her favorite blouse, at the evidence of her own helplessness. "If I tell you," she whispered, "what will you do?" He leaned back, the leather chair creaking under his weight. The candlelight caught the sharp angles of his face, made him look like something carved from darkness itself. "What do you think I'll do?" "Something violent." "Yes." "Something you can't take back." "Yes." "Something that will make you more of a monster than people already think you are." He smiled then, that shark smile she'd seen that first day. "I've never cared what people think of me. Only what you think of me." Her breath caught. They'd danced around this for so long. The thing between them that was more than friendship but less than love. The invisible line they'd both been too careful to cross. "I think," she said slowly, "that you're a good man pretending to be a bad one. You're wrong." He stood, moved around the desk, and she realized how big he was. How much space he took up. How easy it would be for him to hurt her. How certain she was that he never would. "I'm a bad man who's trying very hard not to be worse around you." He crouched in front of her chair, bringing them eye to eye. This close, she could see the faint scar tissue on his knuckles. Could smell his cologne mixed with something else. Gun oil, maybe. The scent of violence barely contained. "I have done terrible things," he continued, his voice low. "I have hurt people. Killed people. Built an empire on fear and blood. I am not redeemable, Rebecca. I am not a project you can fix with patience and kindness." "I don't want to fix you." "Then what do you want?" It was the question that had been sitting between them for months. The elephant in every room they shared. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the truth he'd been hiding. That he cared. That somehow, impossibly, this man who cared about nothing had started caring about her. And she'd started caring back. "I want," she said carefully, "to go home and forget this happened." His jaw tightened. "No. Dong. No." He reached up, his fingers curling into the collar of her blouse. Not violently. Not sexually. Just anchoring her. Connecting them. "You don't get to be noble about this. You don't get to protect people who hurt you because you think it makes you good." She grabbed his collar in return, bunching the expensive fabric in her fists. "And you don't get to burn down the world because someone hurt me." "Yes," he said simply. "I do." The certainty in his voice should have scared her. Should have sent her running. Instead, it made her feel something she hadn't felt since the alley. Safe. "They said." She swallowed hard. "They said to tell you Park Ji-hoon sends his regards." Something flickered across Dong's face. Recognition. Then calculation. Then something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Ah," he said softly. "That makes sense. You know him." "I know of him. A mid-level boss who thinks he's bigger than he is. He's been pushing into territories that don't belong to him. Making noise about taking over distribution in Itaewon." His thumb brushed against her jaw, featherlight. "He hurt you to send me a message. Then the message is sent. You don't need to. Rebecca." He pulled her closer, their faces inches apart. The candles behind him created a halo of golden light, making him look like a dark angel. Or a fallen god. This isn't about messages. This isn't about territory or pride or business. This is about the fact that someone put their hands on you. Someone made you afraid. Someone touched something that I have claimed as under my protection. I'm not property. No. You're something much more valuable. You're mine. The word hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them could take back. I'm not yours, she said, but her voice was weak. Then why did you call me? Why not the police? Why not your friends? He leaned impossibly closer. You called me because you knew what I would do. Because part of you, the part that's tired of being afraid, tired of being vulnerable, wants me to do it. He was right. God help her, he was right. She had called him because she'd known that Jiang Dong would move heaven and earth to make sure she was safe, that he would burn down anyone who dared touch her. She should be horrified, should be planning her escape back to Atlanta, should be calling her mother and admitting that she'd gotten in over her head. Instead, she was sitting in a crime lord's private lounge, gripping his collar, feeling safer than she had in hours. If you do this, she whispered, there's no going back. For either of us. I crossed that line the day I met you. The day I decided you were worth protecting. The day I realized that you had somehow become the only good thing in my very bad life. A tear slipped down her cheek. He caught it with his thumb, his touch unbearably gentle. Give me a name, he said again. Tell me exactly what happened, and I will make sure it never happens again. She looked into his eyes, those dark, dangerous eyes, and made a choice. Maybe it was the wrong choice. Maybe it made her complicit in whatever came next. Maybe it meant she wasn't the good person she'd always tried to be. But she was tired of being good. Tired of turning the other cheek. Tired of being the modest lady who apologized for existing. His name was Park Ji-hoon, she said, her voice steady now. There were two men. The alley was behind the convenience store on the corner of Hongdae and Yanghua. They knew who I was. Knew about you. Dong listened, his face expressionless, but she could feel the rage building in him like a storm gathering strength. They said I was an American bitch. Said I didn't belong here. One of them slapped me. The other held me against the wall. She took a shaking breath. They said to tell you that everything you protect, they can touch. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the candles seemed to stop flickering. Then Dong stood, his movements controlled and precise. He released her collar, smoothed down his suit, adjusted his cuffs. The casual gesture somehow more terrifying than any threat. Thank you, he said quietly, for trusting me with this. What are you going to do? He looked down at her, and for just a moment, she saw past the monster to the man beneath. The man who had listened to her talk about books and students and dreams. The man who had somehow, impossibly, fallen for a literacy teacher from Atlanta. I'm going to remind this city why they fear my name, he said simply. I'm going to make an example that will echo through every gang, every organization, every petty criminal who thinks they can touch what's mine. He walked to the door, paused, looked back. Go home, Rebecca. Have some of that chamomile tea you like. Read one of those books you're always trying to get me to read. By sunrise, this will be handled. Dong. And Rebecca. His voice softened. You were never just a friend. You were never just another person I protected. You were always something more. I just didn't want to admit it. Didn't want to pull you into my world. I think I pulled myself in. He smiled, a real smile this time, tinged with sadness. Yes, you did. And now there's no going back. For either of us. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the candlelit room with the smell of sandalwood and the weight of what she'd just set in motion. Outside, Seoul was waking to what would become known as the Night of Red Rain. A night when the dragon head reminded everyone why monsters existed. Why some people were born to be protected, and others were born to do the protecting. And in her apartment, hours later, Rebecca would sip chamomile tea and stare at her phone, waiting for a message that would either confirm she'd made the right choice or prove she'd just condemned herself to loving a man who could never be anything but dangerous. The message would come at dawn. It's done. You're safe. Always. Asterisk asterisk. 3 words that would change everything. 3 words that would make her realize she'd fallen in love with a monster. And that maybe, just maybe, she was okay with that. The thing about blood, Dong had learned over 20 years in this business, was that it never washed away cleanly. It stained. It lingered. It seeped into cracks and crevices and left marks that no amount of bleach could erase. Park Ji-hoon's blood was currently seeping into the concrete floor of a warehouse in Incheon. Dong stood in the shadows, watching his men work with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. They'd done this before. Many times. The warehouse was one of several he kept for situations exactly like this. Far enough from Seoul proper that screams wouldn't attract attention, close enough that the message would spread quickly. Boss, Kong Min-soo, his second in command, approached with a tablet. We've got confirmation. Park was working with the Busan group. They've been planning to move into Seoul for months. The woman was a test. They wanted to see how you'd react. How I'd react, Dong repeated, his voice flat. He looked at Park, zip-tied to a chair in the center of the warehouse, blood running from his nose, his expensive designer shirt torn and dirty. They sent 2 men to assault an unarmed woman to test my reaction. Yes, boss. Dong walked toward Park slowly, each footstep echoing in the cavernous space. The other man, the one who'd held Rebecca against the wall, was already unconscious in the corner. Dong had handled him personally, quickly, efficiently. The man would live, but he'd never use his hands the same way again. But Park was different. Park was the one who'd given the order, the one who'd orchestrated it, the one who'd thought he could use Rebecca as a pawn in his pathetic power play. Mr. Park, Dong said, crouching in front of the chair. We meet at last. Park spat blood onto the floor. Fuck you, Jang. You're losing your grip. Everyone knows it. You're going soft. All because of some American whore. The punch came so fast Park didn't see it. One moment Dong was still. The next his fist had connected with Park's jaw hard enough to snap his head back. Let's establish some ground rules, Dong said, his voice conversational despite the violence. You don't get to speak about her. You don't get to think about her. You definitely don't get to touch her. Are we clear? Park laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. You're pathetic. The great Jang Dong, brought down by a woman. My grandfather was right. You're not your father's son. You're weak. Dong stood, pulled out his phone, and scrolled through his messages. There was one from Rebecca, sent 20 minutes ago. Are you okay? Even now, she was worried about him. The woman who'd been assaulted was asking if her monster was okay. He typed back, *, I'm fine. Sleep. I'll check on you tomorrow. *. Then he pocketed the phone and looked at Park. You know what the difference is between you and me? Enlighten me. I know exactly who I am. I'm a monster. I've made peace with that. But you're a monster who thinks he's a hero. Who thinks hurting innocent people makes you powerful. It doesn't. It makes you pathetic. He nodded to Min-soo. Send him back to Busan. Alive but barely. Make sure everyone sees him. Make sure they understand what happens when you touch something under my protection. What about the Busan group? Dong considered. The smart play would be negotiation. A sit-down. Drawing new territorial lines. That's what his father would have done. What a good boss would do. But Dong was tired of being smart. Call Lee Sang-ho, he said, referring to the head of the Busan organization. Tell him we need to talk. Tomorrow night. Neutral ground. And tell him to bring his checkbook. He's about to pay for some very expensive mistakes. You're going to let them pay their way out? No. I'm going to make them think they can pay their way out. Then I'm going to take everything they have. He looked at Park one more time. Starting with their pride. Rebecca couldn't sleep. She'd tried. Had gone through her normal routine, shower, tea, reading. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the alley. Felt the hands. Heard the laughter. And then she saw Dong's face. The cold rage. The promise. What have I done? Her apartment felt too small suddenly. Too quiet. She could hear every creak, every distant sound from the street below. Seoul was never truly quiet, but at 3 a.m. it came close. Her phone buzzed. A message from Sarah, her closest friend in Seoul, a British teacher who'd been here for 5 years. You up? Rebecca called her instead of texting back. Babe, it's 3 a.m., Sarah answered, her voice groggy. This better be good. I think I did something terrible. She heard rustling, then Sarah's voice, clearer now. What kind of terrible? Rebecca told her everything. The attack. The call to Dong. The conversation in the lounge. Sarah listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. Sarah always had opinions. When Rebecca finished, there was a long silence. Say something, Rebecca prompted. I'm trying to figure out if I should be horrified or relieved, Sarah admitted. On one hand, you basically sicked a crime lord on some guys. On the other hand, those guys assaulted you. They deserved whatever's coming. That's not how justice works. Becca, honey, you're a good person. The best person I know. But you're also living in a city where the police barely speak English, where foreigners, especially black foreigners, aren't always taken seriously. You think if you'd reported this, they would have done anything. Rebecca knew she was right. She'd heard the stories, seen the statistics. Seoul was generally safe, but when things went wrong for foreigners, the system didn't always help. But Dong. She trailed off. Dong is complicated, Sarah said carefully. I've heard things. Everyone has. But I've also seen how he is around you. Last month, when we went to that restaurant in Gangnam and those guys were being racist assholes, they left real quick. I asked the owner why, and he just said, Jang Dong's friend is here. You're protected, Becca. That's not nothing. I don't want to be the reason people get hurt. You're not the reason. They are. They made a choice. Actions have consequences. That sounds like something Dong would say. Sarah laughed. Maybe you two are more alike than you think. Look, get some sleep. Or try to. And tomorrow, we're getting brunch and talking about this properly. With mimosas. Lots of mimosas. After they hung up, Rebecca lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her phone sat on the nightstand, dark and silent. She kept expecting another message from Dong. An update. A confirmation. Instead, there was nothing. The silence was somehow worse than knowing. Dong returned to his penthouse in Gangnam at 4 a.m. His knuckles were bruised, his suit was ruined, and he had blood on his shoes that wasn't his. It had been a productive night. His apartment was all glass and steel, minimalist in a way that suggested money and taste but no real personality. He'd lived here for 3 years and it still felt like a hotel. The only personal touches were a few photos. His sister's wedding, his mother before she died, Minjun's latest report card that he'd framed because it had all A's. And on his nightstand a book, The Color Purple by Alice Walker. Rebecca had insisted he read it. You need to understand the American black experience if you're going to understand me, she'd said, pressing the worn paperback into his hands. I understand you fine. You understand one version of me. The version that exists here in Seoul, where I'm just an expat. But this book, it shows you where I come from. What my people have survived. He'd read it in 3 nights. Had highlighted passages that reminded him of her strength, her resilience, her refusal to be broken by a world that constantly tried to break her. Now he picked up the book, ran his fingers over the cover, and felt something uncomfortably close to fear. He'd killed men tonight, ordered torture, committed acts that would haunt normal people's dreams. And he felt nothing about that. It was business. Necessary. But the thought of Rebecca looking at him differently? Of her seeing him as the monster he actually was? That terrified him. His phone rang. Min-soo. Talk to me. It's done. Park is on his way to Busan in a medical transport. Lee Sang-ho has agreed to the meeting. Tomorrow, 8 p.m., the restaurant in Myeongdong. Good. What about the other one? Hospital. He'll live, but he's already talking. Gave us names of everyone involved in the plan. Turns out it goes deeper than we thought. This wasn't just about territory. They were trying to leverage your relationship with the American to get to your overseas connections. Dong felt his jaw tighten. They thought hurting her would make me weak. They thought wrong. Clearly. Send flowers to her literacy center. Anonymous. Roses. Pink ones. She likes those. There was a pause. Boss, are you sure that's wise? Getting more involved with her, I mean. It's already complicated. When I want your opinion on my personal life, Min-Soo, I'll ask for it. Understood. One more thing. We've been monitoring her communications. She told a friend about tonight. The British teacher, Sarah Mitchell. And nothing. The friend was supportive. But boss, if she keeps talking. She won't. Dong knew Rebecca well enough to know that. She might confide in one close friend, but she wouldn't spread it around. She understood discretion, even if she didn't fully understand his world. Anything else? The usual. 2 territorial disputes, 1 shipment delayed, 3 requests for meetings. Nothing urgent. Handle it. I'm taking tomorrow off. Another pause. Dong never took days off. Boss. I need to check on someone. Make sure she's okay. Is that a problem? No, sir. Of course not. Dong hung up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Seoul. The city was a carpet of lights, stretching to the horizon. Somewhere out there, Rebecca was sleeping. Or trying to. Probably overthinking everything, the way she always did. He'd meant what he said in the lounge. She'd never been just a friend. From that first day, when she'd stood in her little literacy center and told him he was in the wrong place, he'd been intrigued. Most people cowered around him. She'd just been annoyed that he was blocking her bookshelf. Over the months, intrigue had become something else. Something he didn't have a name for. He'd told himself it was just protectiveness. She was kind, she was good, she was everything his world wasn't. Of course he'd want to keep that safe. But it was more than that. It was the way she laughed at his dry humor. The way she called him on his bullshit. The way she looked at him like he was a person, not a position. Like Jang Dong the man, not Jang Dong the dragon head. It was the way his carefully constructed world felt less empty when she was in it. And tonight, when she'd sat across from him with a bruise on her face and fear in her eyes, something had broken in him. Some final barrier between who he was supposed to be and who he actually was. He'd built his reputation on being heartless. On being the man who couldn't be moved, couldn't be leveraged, couldn't be touched. Park Ji-hoon had found his weakness and exploited it. And in doing so had signed his own death warrant. Because Dong had lied earlier. Park wasn't going back to Busan alive. He'd be dead before the medical transport reached the city limits. And Lee Sang-ho's meeting tomorrow wasn't a negotiation. It was a funeral. His phone buzzed with a message. From Rebecca. Asterisk can't sleep. Keep thinking about everything. Are you really okay? Asterisk. He stared at the message for a long moment, then typed. Asterisk I'm fine. Better question, are you okay? Asterisk. The response came quickly. Asterisk I don't know. I feel like I should regret calling you. Like I should feel guilty about whatever you did tonight. But I don't. Is that bad? Asterisk. He smiled despite himself. There it was. The truth she'd been avoiding. She wasn't horrified by his violence. She was relieved by it. It's human, he typed. Asterisk someone hurt you. You wanted consequences. That's not bad, it's honest. Asterisk. My mother would say I should forgive and pray for them. Your mother isn't the one with a bruise on her face. A long pause, then, I'm scared. His chest tightened. Of me. Asterisk of how not scared I am of you. Of how safe I feel knowing you're out there. Of how much I wanted you to hurt them. That's not who I thought I was. Asterisk. Dong understood that feeling. The dissonance between who you thought you were and who you actually turned out to be. He'd felt it the first time he'd killed someone. The shock of realizing it was easier than he'd expected. That he could do terrible things and sleep just fine. You're still the same person, he typed. Asterisk you still help kids learn to read. You still apologize to furniture. You're still good, Rebecca. One moment of wanting revenge doesn't change that. Asterisk. Says the man who probably just committed multiple felonies on my behalf. Asterisk, I was going to commit them anyway. You just gave me a specific target. Asterisk. Even through text, he could feel her smile. That's not reassuring. Asterisk, it wasn't meant to be. Go to sleep. I'll come by tomorrow if you want. We can talk. Actually, talk. Asterisk. About what? Asterisk, about whatever this is between us. About where we go from here. About whether you can handle being connected to someone like me. Asterisk. Another long pause. Then, asterisk, okay. Tomorrow. Afternoon. Come to the center. I'll make coffee. Asterisk. I'll be there. Dong. Yes. Asterisk, thank you. For tonight. For everything. I know I'm supposed to be horrified, but I'm just grateful. Asterisk. He stared at those words for a long time. Grateful. She was grateful to a monster for being monstrous. Maybe they were more alike than either of them wanted to admit. Asterisk, sleep. Rebecca. Dream of better things than me. Asterisk. Too late for that. He put the phone down and returned to the window. Tomorrow would be complicated. The meeting with Lee Sang-ho. The conversation with Rebecca. The inevitable fallout from tonight's actions. But for now, Seoul was quiet, and somewhere in Itaewon, a woman who'd somehow become his entire world was finally falling asleep. And that was enough. For tonight, that was enough. Rebecca woke to sunlight streaming through her apartment windows and the smell of something burning. It took her a moment to realize the smell was coming from her kitchen, where she'd apparently left the stove on all night after making tea. The kettle was a scorched, smoking disaster. She grabbed it with a towel, threw it in the sink, and opened all the windows, cursing herself. This was what happened when you couldn't sleep. When your mind was replaying conversations with crime lords instead of letting you rest. Her phone showed 11 a.m. She'd finally fallen asleep around 5 and had slept through 3 alarms. There were messages from Sarah, asterisk brunch at 1? I'm buying asterisk. From her mother, asterisk haven't heard from you in days. Baby girl, call me asterisk. And from Min Jun, asterisk Miss Rebecca, I got 100% on my English test. Asterisk. Nothing from Dong since last night. She stared at Min Jun's message, her chest tightening. That sweet kid, Dong's nephew, had no idea what his uncle had done last night. Had no idea that the man who came to his tutoring sessions and praised his test scores was the same man who'd probably tortured someone in her name. Compartmentalization, she thought. Asterisk, that's what this is. The ability to be 2 people at once. Asterisk. She understood it better now. How Dong could sit in her literacy center, helping a struggling kid with pronunciation, then leave and do whatever terrible things he did. He wasn't lying or pretending. He was genuinely both people. The uncle and the monster. The protector and the predator. And somehow, impossibly, she was falling for both versions. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed the evidence of last night. The bruise on her cheek had darkened to a deep purple blue, spreading across her cheekbone like spilled ink. Her throat had fingerprint bruises she hadn't noticed before. Her wrists were red and raw. She looked like a victim. She felt like a survivor. There was a difference. She texted Sarah back. Asterisk, can't do brunch. Dong's coming by the center this afternoon. Rain check. Asterisk. The response was immediate. Asterisk. Finally. About time you two stopped dancing around whatever this is. Call me after. I want all the details. Asterisk. Rebecca smiled despite herself. Sarah had been telling her for months that the tension between her and Dong was thick enough to cut with a knife. That their friendship was clearly something more, and everyone could see it except them. Maybe Sarah had been right. She dressed carefully. Jeans and a soft yellow sweater that her mother had sent from Atlanta. Something that said, normal person having a normal conversation. Not woman whose crime lord protector is coming to define their relationship. The literacy center looked exactly as she'd left it yesterday. Colorful, chaotic, full of books and hope. A handful of students were already there, working on homework. Mrs. Kim, the elderly Korean woman who volunteered most afternoons, was organizing the children's section. Rebecca. Mrs. Kim exclaimed when she saw her, then immediately switched to rapid Korean, pointing at Rebecca's face with concern. "I'm okay," Rebecca assured her in broken Korean. "Accident. Small accident." Mrs. Kim didn't look convinced, but she patted Rebecca's hand and went back to organizing, though she kept shooting worried glances her way. Rebecca made coffee. Good coffee the expensive beans Dong had brought her from some specialty roaster in Gangnam, and tried not to watch the door. He arrived at exactly 2 p.m. She'd never seen him in daylight at the center. He'd always come in the evening, when the lighting was dim and his presence could blend into shadows. But now, in the full afternoon sun streaming through the windows, he looked different. Still dangerous. Still powerful. But somehow more human. He wore black jeans and a simple gray sweater. Designer, she could tell, but understated. His tattoos were hidden except for the smallest hint of black ink at his collar. He looked like he could be anyone. A businessman. A graduate student. Just another person in Seoul. Until you looked at his eyes. Those eyes that had seen too much, done too much, to ever be mistaken for ordinary. "Hi," she said, suddenly nervous. "Hi." He stood in the doorway, and she realized he was waiting. Waiting for her to invite him in to make the choice, to bridge the gap. She walked over and took his hand, a simple gesture but loaded with meaning. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. "Coffee's ready," she said. "And we have about an hour before the after-school rush." He nodded and let her lead him to the small office in the back. Really just a converted storage room with a desk, 2 chairs, and walls covered in student artwork. She poured coffee into mismatched mugs. He took his black exactly as she knew he would. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "Badly." "You?" "Same." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down like humidity before a storm. "I need to tell you something," they both said simultaneously, then laughed, a brief nervous sound that broke some of the tension. "You first," Rebecca said. Dong set down his coffee and looked at her directly. "Park Ji-hoon is dead." She'd expected it, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch to the gut. "When?" "Around 4 a.m. Medical transport accident on the way to Busan." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was reporting the weather. "The driver survived. Park didn't." "That's not really an accident, is it?" "No." "Did you?" "I gave the order." "I didn't do it personally, but it's the same thing. His blood is on my hands." Rebecca stared into her coffee, watching the steam rise. A man was dead. Because of her. Because she'd given Dong his name. "Are you waiting for me to be horrified?" she asked quietly. "Yes." "I'm not. You should be." She looked up at him. "Why? Because I'm supposed to value all human life equally? Because I'm supposed to believe in redemption and second chances? I do believe in those things, Dong. But I also believe that some people make choices that forfeit their right to second chances. That's a dangerous philosophy. So is yours. You kill people who threaten your business, your territory, your power. I'm just extending that to people who threaten innocence. Is that so different?" He leaned back, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're rationalizing." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just being honest about who I am when I'm scared. When I'm hurt. Maybe the modest lady everyone thinks I am is just one version of me, and there's another version who's tired of being a victim." "Rebecca." "You said last night that I was yours." The words came out stronger than she'd intended. "What did you mean by that?" He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the ceramic mug. "I meant that I've claimed you. In my world, that's a declaration. It means you're under my protection. It means anyone who touches you answers to me. It means..." He paused, searching for words. "It means you're the one thing in the city I care about more than power." Her heart was doing something complicated in her chest. "That's not an answer. That's a Mafia declaration." "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to say what you actually mean. Not in code. Not in metaphors. Just truth." He set down his coffee and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Fine. Truth. I've been in this life for 20 years. I've built an empire. I've made enemies and allies. I've had women throw themselves at me because of my power, my money, my reputation. And I've felt nothing. Nothing real. He looked at her, and she saw something raw in his expression. Something vulnerable. Then you walked into my life with your literacy program and your terrible coffee and your belief that you could actually make a difference in this city. And you were so. He searched for the word. Bright. Like someone had turned on a light in a room I didn't know was dark. Dong. Let me finish. His voice was rough. I told myself it was just respect. Just appreciation for what you do. But then you started texting me about your students. Started telling me stories about teaching. Started looking at me like I was a person, not a position. And I realized I was waking up thinking about you. Going to sleep thinking about you. Checking my phone constantly to see if you'd messaged. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. That's not how I work. I don't do feelings. I don't do complications. But with you, I can't seem to help it. Rebecca felt her throat tighten. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm in love with you. I'm saying that somewhere between tutoring sessions and coffee meetups and late-night conversations, you became the most important person in my world. I'm saying that when I saw you hurt last night, something broke in me. And I realized I would burn down this entire city if it meant keeping you safe. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. That's... Rebecca started, then stopped. That's the most romantic and terrifying thing anyone's ever said to me. I'm a romantic and terrifying person. She laughed, a real laugh this time, breaking through the tension. You are. You really are. Your turn, he said quietly. What were you going to tell me? Rebecca took a deep breath. This was it. The moment where she either walked away from him, or walked toward something that could never be simple or safe or easy. I was going to tell you that I'm scared. Not of you, but of how I feel about you. Because I came to Seoul to start over. To be independent. To prove I didn't need a man to protect me or save me or define me. She met his eyes. But then I met you, and you didn't try to protect me from the world. You just walked beside me through it. You didn't save me. You gave me the tools to save myself. And you definitely didn't define me, you just saw me. Really saw me. Rebecca. I'm in love with you too, she said, the words rushing out. I've been trying not to be. I've been telling myself it's just friendship, just gratitude, just anything other than what it actually is. But I can't lie anymore. Not after last night. Not after you looked at me like I was something worth going to war for. She stood up, and he stood with her, and suddenly they were close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. I know this is complicated, she continued. I know your world is dangerous. I know that being with you means accepting parts of you that I can never fully understand. But Dong, I've spent my whole life being the good girl. The safe choice. The one who colored inside the lines. And look where it got me, assaulted in an alley afraid to walk home. She reached up, her hand touching his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her palm. Maybe it's time I stopped being safe. Maybe it's time I chose something real, even if it's dangerous. His hand covered hers, pressing it against his heart. If you do this, if you choose this, there's no going back. My enemies will see you as leverage. My world will touch yours in ways you can't predict. You'll have to accept things about me that will keep you up at night. I already can't sleep, she pointed out. Might as well have a good reason. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. You're insane. You know that. Probably. But you love me anyway. I do. God help me, I do. Then he was kissing her, and it was nothing like she'd imagined. It wasn't soft or tentative. It was fierce and claiming and full of months of denied tension. His hand tangled in her hair, her fingers gripped his sweater, and for a moment the world narrowed to just this, the taste of coffee on his lips, the solid strength of him against her, the feeling of finally letting herself fall. When they broke apart, both breathing hard. Dong rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he murmured. "Good. I was tired of everything the way it was." A knock on the door made them both jump. Mrs. Kim's voice called through. "Miss Rebecca? Students arriving." Rebecca laughed, wiping lipstick off Dong's mouth with her thumb. "I have to work. I have to meet with a Busan crime boss who wants me dead. That's a hell of a scheduling conflict." He kissed her once more, quickly. "Dinner tonight? Somewhere public so you don't think I'm kidnapping you. As opposed to all the private places where you definitely would kidnap me?" "Exactly." She walked him to the door, and they stood there for a moment, neither wanting to break the connection. Students were filing in, and she saw a few of them staring at Dong with wide eyes. He had that effect on people. "Be careful," she said quietly. "With the Busan boss." "Always am." "Dong." She grabbed his hand. "I mean it. Now that I've admitted how I feel, I'd like you to stick around." Something soft flickered across his face. "I'll be fine. I've been doing this a long time." "That's not reassuring." "It wasn't meant to be." He squeezed her hand. "I'll text you when it's done." "And Rebecca, thank you." "For what?" "For choosing me, even knowing what I am." Then he was gone, walking out into the Seoul afternoon, and Rebecca was left standing in her literacy center, her lips still tingling, her heart doing complicated gymnastics in her chest. Mrs. Kim appeared beside her, watching Dong disappear down the street. She said something in Korean that Rebecca didn't catch, then added in careful English, "Dangerous man." "Yes," Rebecca agreed. "But he looks at you like you are the sun." Rebecca smiled. "Yes, he does." "Then maybe dangerous is okay. Sometimes." Maybe it was. Maybe loving someone dangerous was its own kind of bravery. Maybe choosing to walk toward fire instead of away from it was the most honest thing she'd ever done. She turned back to her students, to the safety of books and learning and the life she'd built here. But now that life had a new dimension. A shadow that walked beside her. A monster who loved her. And she was okay with that. More than okay. She was happy. Dear viewers, have you ever had to choose between what's safe and what's real in a relationship? How did you decide? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. Asterisk. The restaurant in Myeongdong was called Seokshon, which meant Stone River, and it had been a neutral meeting ground for Seoul's underworld for 30 years. The owner, an ancient man named Mr. Cho, had survived 3 different regime changes in the criminal hierarchy by maintaining absolute neutrality and serving exceptional bulgogi. Dong arrived 15 minutes early, which meant he was actually right on time. In his world, arriving exactly when scheduled was a sign of weakness. It meant you were eager, desperate, or worst of all, punctual like a civilian. Min-soo was already there, seated at a corner table with a sightline to both exits. 2 other men, Jung-ho and Dae-young, Dong's most trusted enforcers, were positioned at the bar, looking like typical salarymen unwinding after work. "Status?" Dong asked quietly as he sat. Lee Sang-ho arrived 10 minutes ago. He's in the private room with 4 bodyguards. They're armed, but Cho made them check the guns at the door. Only 4. He's either very confident or very stupid. "My money's on stupid," Min-soo said. He's been in charge of the Busan operation for less than a year. His father ran it before him, but the old man actually had sense. This one thinks he's invincible because he's young and educated. MBA from Harvard, apparently. Dong smiled. An MBA. That explains why he thought assaulting an innocent woman was a viable business strategy. Boss about that. Min-soo hesitated. The woman. Rebecca. Are you sure it's wise to? Min-soo. Dong's voice was quiet but carried a weight that made his second-in-command stop talking immediately. I'm going to say this once. My relationship with Rebecca is not up for discussion. Not with you, not with the board, not with anyone. Are we clear? Crystal. But you know how this looks. You've always said personal attachments are liabilities. They are. She is. And I don't care. Dong stood, straightening his suit, A different one from this morning, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes. Let's go remind Mr. Harvard MBA why his father feared me. The private room was decorated in traditional Korean style, with low tables and floor cushions. Lee Sang-ho sat at the head of the table, flanked by his bodyguards. He was younger than Dong had expected. Maybe 30, with expensive glasses and a suit that screamed new money. "Mr. Jang," Lee said in English, standing with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Mr. Lee." Dong didn't sit. "Before we begin, I need to clarify something. This isn't a negotiation. This is me explaining to you how things are going to work from now on." The smile faltered. "I'm sorry. Your man, Park Ji-hoon. He's dead. Did you hear?" Lee's face paled slightly. Yes. Tragic accident. There's no such thing as a tragic accident in our world. There are only consequences. Dong moved around the table slowly, deliberately. He assaulted a woman under my protection. He thought it would send me a message. Did you approve this plan? I don't know what you're talking about. Dong pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and turned it toward Lee. The screen showed a photo. Park Ji-hoon, beaten and bloody, zip-tied to a chair. Time-stamped from last night. "This was your message to me," Dong said. "Attack my weakness. Make me look soft. Force me to overreact so you can position yourself as the reasonable one when you move into Seoul. Am I close?" Lee's jaw tightened. "You have no proof I ordered anything." "I don't need proof. I need you to understand something fundamental about how power works." Dong sat down finally, directly across from Lee. "You thought attacking an unarmed woman made you look strong. It didn't. It made you look desperate. Weak. Like someone who can't compete on actual merit." He leaned forward. "Your father understood this. He knew that there are rules. Lines you don't cross. One of those lines is civilians. Especially civilians who have nothing to do with our business." "She's connected to you," Lee countered. "That makes her part of the game." "No. It makes her protected. There's a difference." Dong's voice dropped to something cold and final. "And now you're going to pay for forgetting that difference. You killed Park. Isn't that payment enough? Park was an employee. A message. But you're the one who gave the order. So here's what's going to happen." Dong pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "This contains documentation of every illegal operation your organization runs in Busan. The gambling dens, the protection rackets, the drug distribution networks. Everything." Lee's face went white. "How did you?" "I've known about your operations for years. Your father and I had an understanding. He stayed in Busan, I stayed in Seoul, and we both prospered. But you decided to break that understanding. So now I'm breaking our silence." Dong tapped the folder. "Copies of these documents are currently with 3 different people. If anything happens to me, they go to the authorities. Your entire organization collapses in a week." "You'd bring the police into this?" Lee's voice was incredulous. "That's not how we do things. You assaulted an innocent woman. You don't get to lecture me about how we do things." Dong stood. "Here's your choice. You pull all operations out of Seoul. You pay a monthly tribute to compensate for the disrespect. And you publicly apologize to me, not to save face, but to ensure every organization in Korea knows what happens when you cross Jiangdong. And if I refuse, then I release those documents, I move into Busan, and I dismantle everything your father built. Your choice. But choose quickly, I have dinner plans." Lee looked at his bodyguards, who looked back with uncertainty. This wasn't how these meetings usually went. Typically there was posturing, negotiation, eventual compromise. But Dong wasn't negotiating. "This is insane," Lee said finally. "You're starting a war over a woman." "No. I'm ending a war before it begins. And I'm teaching you a lesson your father apparently failed to teach. Some people are off limits. Always." Dong walked toward the door, then paused. "You have 24 hours to decide. After that, I make the decision for you. And Mr. Lee, choose wisely. Your Harvard MBA might have taught you about business strategy, but it didn't teach you about respect. Consider this your education. He left the room, Min-soo falling into step beside him. That went better than expected, Min-soo said quietly. He'll refuse, Dong replied. He's too proud and too stupid to see the trap. Which is fine. I was hoping he'd refuse. Why? Because the Busan territory is worth 10 times what he'll pay in tribute. This way, I get to look reasonable while taking everything he has. Dong smiled. His father would have seen it coming. But the son. He thinks his MBA makes him smart. They exited the restaurant into the cool Seoul evening. Dong checked his phone, a message from Rebecca. Asterisk, how did it go? Still alive. Asterisk. He typed back. Asterisk, still alive. Dinner at 8. I'll pick you up. Asterisk. The response was immediate. Asterisk, I can meet you there. I'm an independent woman, remember? Asterisk. Asterisk, humor me. After last night, I'd prefer to know exactly where you are. Asterisk. A pause, then. Asterisk, fine. But I'm picking the restaurant. Asterisk. Deal. Don't blink. Subscribe, comment your country. Then watch what happens next. You're not ready. Min-soo cleared his throat. Boss, about the Busan situation. Handle it. I want surveillance on Lee for the next 24 hours. When he makes a move, and he will, I want to know about it immediately. And if he accepts your terms, then we've won without bloodshed, and I'm a generous god. Dong looked at his watch. 7:15 p.m. I need to go. Keep me updated. A date night in the middle of a territorial conflict. Your father would have had a heart attack. My father died angry and alone because he prioritized business over everything else. I'm not making that mistake. He meant it. His father had been the dragonhead before him, a man who'd built the empire Dong now controlled. But he'd also been a man who'd died without friends, without love, with nothing but power and money and fear. Dong had sworn he wouldn't end up like that. And then he'd spent 15 years becoming exactly like that. Until Rebecca. Rebecca changed outfits 4 times before settling on a deep red dress that her mother would call too much for a first date, but that Sarah would call perfect for a date with a crime lord. It was their first official date. After months of coffee and conversations and carefully maintained boundaries, they were finally acknowledging what this was. And she was terrified. Not of Dong, she'd moved past that fear. But of what this meant. Of how her life was about to change. Of explaining this to her mother, who still thought she was dating a nice Korean businessman. Her phone rang. Her mother, as if summoned by thought. Hi, Mama. Baby girl. Finally. I've been trying to reach you for 3 days. I know, I'm sorry. It's been busy. Too busy to call your mother? Rebecca Marie, I didn't raise you to. She paused. What's wrong? Rebecca had always marveled at her mother's ability to hear things that weren't said. Nothing's wrong. Don't lie to me. I can hear it in your voice. What happened? Rebecca sat on her bed, dress half-zipped, and made a decision. I met someone. A pause. Someone. A man. Someone. Significant. She could practically hear her mother's smile through the phone. Well, praise Jesus. Finally. Tell me everything. Is he Korean? How did you meet? Does he treat you right? He's Korean. We met through my literacy program. And yes, he treats me right. All technically true, just missing some key details. What does he do? He's in business. Import-export. Also technically true, depending on your definition of import-export. Is he handsome? Rebecca laughed. Very. And he respects you. Treats you like the queen you are. He does, Mama. He really does. Then I'm happy for you, baby. Lord knows you deserve some happiness. When do I get to meet him? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Rebecca. I'm your mother. I reserve the right to get ahead of myself. Her mother's voice softened. But seriously, baby, I'm proud of you. You went all the way to Korea, built a whole life, found your purpose. And now you found someone who appreciates you. That's beautiful. Tears pricked Rebecca's eyes. Thanks, Mama. Just promise me one thing. What? Promise me you're being safe. Korea is still a foreign country. And men. Well, men are men everywhere. Just be smart, okay? I promise. After they hung up, Rebecca finished getting ready. She looked at herself in the mirror. Dress, makeup, hair all perfect. She looked like someone going on a date, not someone who'd just helped orchestrate a murder. The cognitive dissonance was dizzying. A knock on her door at exactly 8 p.m. Dong stood in the hallway, holding flowers, pink roses, her favorite, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Dark suit, crisp white shirt, no tie. Dangerous and devastating. Hi, she said, suddenly shy. Hi. His eyes traveled over her dress, and something heated flickered in their depths. You look incredible. You clean up pretty well yourself. He handed her the flowers. These are for brightening my entire existence. That's quite a burden for some roses. They're up to the task. She put the flowers in water, grabbed her purse, and let him lead her down to the waiting car. Not the usual black sedan with tinted windows, a regular car, a nice one but not ostentatious. He was trying, she realized. Trying to make this normal. Where are we going? She asked as he pulled into traffic. There's a French restaurant in Itaewon. Small, quiet, excellent food. You thought I'd appreciate normal. Am I wrong? She looked at him, at this man who'd killed for her, who'd threatened a rival crime boss for her, who was now driving her to a French restaurant like a regular boyfriend. No, you're not wrong. The restaurant was exactly as he'd described. Intimate, elegant, with soft jazz playing and candlelight that made everything feel like a dream. The owner greeted Dong by name, led them to a private corner table. You come here often? Rebecca asked, sitting down. Once or twice a month. It's quiet. The owner minds his business. And by minds his business you mean? I mean he doesn't ask questions about who I am or what I do. He just serves excellent cocoa vin and keeps his mouth shut. Dong smiled. I know you're trying to figure out if this is a mob restaurant. It's not. It's just a restaurant owned by a man who values privacy. Is there a difference? In my world, not really. The waiter brought wine, something French and expensive that Rebecca couldn't pronounce. They ordered food, and for a few minutes, just looked at each other across the table. This is strange, Rebecca said finally. What is? This. Us. Being on an actual date after everything that's happened. It feels like we should skip this part and go straight to the complicated stuff. We've been doing the complicated stuff for months. We earned some simple romance. Is anything simple with you? Fair point. She sipped her wine. How did the meeting go? Really? His expression darkened slightly. He's going to refuse my terms. Which means tomorrow things escalate. Escalate how? Better you don't know the details. Dong. Rebecca. He reached across the table, taking her hand. I meant what I said this afternoon. Being with me means accepting that there are parts of my life you can't be involved in. Not because I don't trust you, but because I need to protect you. Including from knowledge that could hurt you. That seems like a convenient excuse to keep secrets. It's not an excuse. It's reality. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I've seen what happens when civilians get too involved in this world. It doesn't end well. So I'm asking you to trust me. To let me handle the dark stuff while you stay in the light. That's not how partnerships work. We're not partners in that sense. You're my. He struggled for the word. You're my reason. The thing that makes all the dark stuff worth it. If you get pulled into that darkness, what's the point? She understood what he was saying, even if she didn't fully agree. Okay. But you have to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll come back. From whatever happens tomorrow, from all the dangerous things you do. Promise me you'll always come back. His eyes softened. I promise. I've survived 20 years in this life. I'm not about to get careless now that I finally have something to live for. The food arrived, beautifully plated, aromatic, probably delicious, though Rebecca barely tasted it. They talked about safer things. Her students, his nephew, a book she'd recommended that he'd actually read, his terrible attempt at making coffee that morning. Normal things. Couple things. And for a few hours in that quiet French restaurant in Idiwan, they were just two people falling in love. Not a crime lord and a literacy teacher. Not a monster and a saint. Just Dong and Rebecca, sharing wine and stories and the tentative hope that maybe, somehow, this impossible thing could work. Can I ask you something? Rebecca said as they finished dessert. Always. When did you know that you loved me? He considered the question seriously. There was a day about 4 months ago. You were teaching Minjun, and he was struggling with pronunciation, getting frustrated. And you didn't baby him or make it easier. You just looked at him and said, being good at something isn't about not struggling. It's about not giving up when you do. He smiled at the memory. And I realized you were talking to me. Not directly, but you were. You saw who I was, saw the struggle of being two people, of trying to be better while being exactly what I needed to be, and you weren't disgusted. You were just there, patient, steady. That's when you knew. That's when I admitted it. I think I knew the day we met, when you told me I was in the wrong place, and I wanted to argue that anywhere you were was exactly the right place. Rebecca felt her heart do that complicated gymnastics thing again. That's unfairly romantic for a crime lord. I contain multitudes. You really do. He paid the check, cash, always cash, and they walked out into the Seoul night. The city was alive with neon and noise and the particular energy that made Seoul feel like it never slept. Can I take you home? He asked. You mean can you drive me home, or is that a euphemism? I mean, can I drive you home and walk you to your door like a gentleman, while thinking very ungentlemanly thoughts? She laughed. Honest. I appreciate that. The drive back to her apartment was quiet, comfortable. His hand found hers across the center console, and she realized this was new. This casual touching, this physical intimacy that they'd both avoided before. At her door, he walked her up despite her protests. I'm not letting you walk up alone. Not after what happened. You know you can't protect me from everything, right? I can try. At her door they stood close, the hallway light casting shadows across his face. She could see the tattoos peeking out from his collar, the slight stubble on his jaw, the way he looked at her like she was something precious. Thank you, she said softly. For tonight. For making this feel normal. Thank you for choosing this. Choosing me. She reached up, cupped his face and kissed him. Slower than this afternoon, but no less intense. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer, and for a moment the world was just the taste of wine on his lips and the solid strength of him against her. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I should go, he murmured, before I forget to be a gentleman. And if I want you to forget? His eyes darkened. Rebecca. Too soon. Way too soon. Ask me again in a month when I'm sure you're not just running on adrenaline and poor judgment. She laughed. Fair enough. He kissed her once more, quickly, then stepped back. Lock your door. Set the alarm. Text me when you're safe inside. So bossy. Protective. There's a difference. She watched him walk away, then went inside and did exactly as he'd asked. Locked the door, set the alarm, texted him. His response came immediately. Asterisk sleep well. Dream of normal things. Asterisk. She typed back. Define normal. Anything that doesn't involve violence, crime, or me. Asterisk then I'll be dreaming of you. You're the most normal thing in my life right now. Asterisk. A pause, then. That's the saddest thing anyone's ever said to me. Or the most romantic. Asterisk or both. Good night, Rebecca. Asterisk. Good night, Dong. She got ready for bed, the red dress carefully hung up, makeup washed off, reality settling back in. Tomorrow, Dong would go back to his world of violence and territory wars. She would go back to teaching kids to read. And somehow, impossibly, they would make this work. Because love, she was learning, wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone worth fighting for. Even if that someone was a monster. Especially if that someone was her monster. And that's where we're stopping. For now. I know you want to know what happens next. Does Dong's meeting with the Busan boss turn deadly? Will Rebecca's mother approve when they finally meet? Can their love survive in his dangerous world? Here's the deal. I need your help to continue this story. If we can hit 200 subscribers, I'll drop part 2 immediately. Packed with more drama, romance, and the twists you're craving. We're so close, and I can't do this without you. So here's what I need you to do right now. Hit that subscribe button, it's free and takes 2 seconds. Like this video if you're invested in Rebecca and Dong's story. Comment below and tell me. Do you think Rebecca made the right choice trusting Dong? And where are you watching from? Your support makes stories like this possible. Let's get to 500 together, and I promise, part 2 will be worth the wait. See you at 200 subscribers.